Biobliss. Viruses. So today's topic is on viruses and what they what they do, are they living or not, and how we can treat them. So what is a virus? Viruses are tiny infectious particles that live inside living organisms. The organism that the virus lives inside of is called the host. So this virus consists of three main parts. First, a small collection of genetic code. Second, surrounded by a protein coat called a caspid. And third, with an outer envelope, which isn't always necessary, but some viruses do have them. And there is a picture on the right side, right over here. And viruses are an example of a major pathogen, and pathogen are any microbes that cause disease. So here are two main structures of how viruses look like. Now, there can be many different forms and shapes and sizes to viruses, but this is the two main ones. The most classical one is called the bacteriophage. It's the not enveloped one. It looks kind of like this with a tail fiber and end plate and the tail sheath, along with the genetic code and the caspid. And then we have the influenza virus, which does have a envelope with a protein caspid and the genetic code, like all viruses. So example of viruses. So the one we're living through right now, the main one is coronavirus, and it kind of is in the name, as you can tell, and it's kind of taken over the world as now it's a pandemic. So viral diseases are among the most widespread illnesses to humans. These range from mild fevers to fatal forms of cancer, so they can be very harmful. Some examples of viruses are the common cold, the flu, also known as influenza, HIV, human immunodeficiency virus, and chickenpox, and many more. Here's a picture of some of the viruses that can occur, but there's obviously a lot more. HIV, hepatitis, Ebola, bacteriophage, influenza, adenovirus, and many more. So the question is, how can we treat a virus? So the thing about viruses are they can't be treated through medicine that contain antibiotics. They can only be prevented, not treat through a vaccine. The use of vaccines have made some disease nearly extinct. So what is a vaccine? A vaccine is a substance that contains a weakened or killed pathogen, in which then it can stimulate antibody production or cellular immunity against pathogens, but can't cause severe infection. So basically, the main thing to take from the slide is antibiotics are not needed for a virus because they can't really stop. I mean, they can try to stop the growth of a virus, but again, viruses, like we'll talk on the next slide, are not really living things. So using antibiotics would kind of be useless. The main thing and the only thing you can actually do is take a vaccine which would help prevent the treatment, not exactly solve the problem. It kind of goes on way on its own. So that brings us to our main question. Are viruses living or not? So viruses are not living actually and can only survive when on/inside a living thing called the host. It must inject its DNA into a living thing in order to reproduce, which is why they're technically not considered alive. Their job is to replicate inside the host and cause disease as pathogens. It can't breathe, move, or eat. If it can't be kept at a stable state homeostasis and can't make its own energy, then it's considered not living, even though it does do, like on this slide, kind of like a chart here. We're not sure about reproduction. It does reproduce, but with the help of the host, so that doesn't really count. Genetic code, yes. Growth, no. Energy, it kind of relies on the living cells for the energy. Homeostasis, no. And adaptation, yes, it does adapt to its host environment. So kind of from this chart, you can see that two of them are just off, and then there's two yeses and two nos. So it's still a very debatable topic, but as of now, just think that viruses are not living. So now for the mini quiz. So number one, true or false? Viruses are non-living. So the correct answer is true. Why? Because viruses are actually, again, like we talked about, not living things. Number two, which of the following is not an example of a virus? So there is chickenpox, there's the flu, there's E. coli, and the common cold. E. coli is actually a bacteria, while the rest are viruses. How can you treat a virus? So, like we talked about, antibiotics don't really help when it comes to viruses since they aren't living, but vaccines can't stop but only prevent the viruses. True or false? Viruses don't have genetic code. Like we talked about before, they do have genetic code, so that is true. That is false. My bad. False. And number five, the organism that the virus lives inside of is called the host. Thanks for watching, and I hope